Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Engage Conference panel on advancing cancer research with foundations, industry, and entrepreneurs. Today's goal of the panel is to help us understand how non-traditional funding sources can be used strategically to help propel cancer research and innovation that impacts society. So I'm your host today. I'm Natalie Pinkerton. I'm an assistant professor at NYU Tandon School of Engineering, and I'm part of the Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering Department. And my research group focuses on developing responsive biomaterials for a variety of biomedical applications, including cancer therapies. So prior to joining NYU, I was a senior scientist and research project leader at Pfizer in their early discovery oncology research unit. And before joining industry, I was a postdoc in a CNRS lab in France, and I received my PhD here at Princeton from the Chemical and Biological Engineering Department. So before I bring in our wonderful panelists today, I would like to encourage you guys to submit any questions you might have throughout the panel using the Q&A module on the right-hand side of your screen here. And so we'll reserve the last 10 minutes of this panel to answer any of your questions that you might have. All right, thank you so much. So please join me in welcoming our first panelist, Professor Eileen White.
Thank you, Natalie. I am Deputy Director and Chief Scientific Officer at the Rutgers Cancer Institute in New Brunswick. I'm also Associate Director of the Ludwig Princeton Branch of the Ludwig Institute for Cancer Research at Princeton University. And my research interests are in cancer metabolism, and specifically my research program has identified that cancer cells start eating themselves, and that's one way that they sustain their metabolism and their survival. And we're very interested in targeting this cellular cannibalization via autophagy for cancer therapy. And I have co-founded a biotech company to do that. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Our next panelist is Joshua Rabinowitz.
Hi, it's really nice to join you all today. I am the director of the Ludwig Princeton Cancer Institute, as well as a Princeton University faculty member in chemistry and in the Genomics Institute. My research focuses on metabolism, including metabolism in the context of cancer. And I'm very interested in what are metabolic ways to attack cancer, both through the diet and through drugs, and also what are metabolic ways to activate the immune system to fight against cancer. And like Eileen, I've been involved with engagement with companies in multiple ways. I've founded companies. I was engaged very early on in the company Agios, which has been the biggest success in the field of cancer metabolism, bringing therapeutic to approval that's now helping cancer patients throughout the country, and have a couple of startups coming out of Princeton that I'm currently engaged with.
Fantastic. Our third panelist is Professor Mona Singh.
Hi, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be here today. So I'm a professor of computer science, and I'm also in the Louis Sigler Institute for Integrative Genomics. So I'm a computer scientist, but my research really is at the interface of molecular biology and computer science. So I work in computational molecular biology, and we develop algorithms and machine learning methods to decipher the genome largely at the level of proteins. We've become really interested in the last decade or so in cancer genomics, and we've developed a number of methods to try to uncover which alterations you see in cancer genomes are likely to play driving roles in cancer. We've collaborated a bunch with industry partners, in particular with Bristol Myers Squibb, to try to figure out which proteins that they can target that are likely to be cancer drivers.
Great, thank you. Our fourth panelist is Dr. Mark Esposito.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. So I received my PhD from Princeton in 2017, and all of my work during that time was focused on studying the fundamental mechanisms that drive late-stage cancer relapse and its spread. And during that time, during my PhD, I identified a unique signaling pathway that's very important for late-stage cancer, as well as resistance to immunotherapies. And so with that discovery, myself and then Yibin, who will come on in a second, spun out Kyocera, which is an innovative company pursuing these first-in-class therapies in order to offer new orally available immunotherapy to patients across the entire solid tumor spectrum. And our goal is to develop this up to human trials in order to give patients with what are currently terminal cancers the hope of durable remissions, or even, dare I say, a cure. And so we spun this out in 2019 with the help of a local foundation. And we're currently engaged in Series A discussions right now to launch this into the clinic.
Very exciting. And our final panelist is Professor Yibin Kang.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yibin Kang. I'm a professor of molecular biology. I'm also an associate director of the Cancer Institute in Jersey, and also a founding member of the Ludwig Institute Princeton Branch. My lab mostly focuses on the study of cancer metastasis. We try to understand why certain cancer metastasize to different organs and what makes them very difficult to treat in the patients. So that line of research have led to the development of two biotech companies I co-founded, including one that I co-founded with Mark. And the focus of those companies are to develop compounds that will intervene the crosstalk between the tumor cells and the microenvironment that they engage in order to prevent or stop the development of metastatic disease.
Great, thank you. Well, to get us started in our discussion today, I first want to ask you guys about what motivated you to seek out foundation, industrial, or VC funding over the more traditional governmental sources of funding. Eileen, if you'd like to get us started. Oh, Eileen, you're muted.
Sorry. So at one point, in order to start developing tool compounds and with the goal of getting something to move into the clinic, traditional mechanisms of funding are just really not that applicable. The scale of money that you need is much, much greater. And also, NIH type funding mechanisms where, you're testing hypotheses are not appropriate for, early drug discovery. So I think that we have to be entrepreneurs and recognize what's, not appropriate for a traditional granting mechanism, and then pivot to, seeking VC funding on a scale that's necessary to start a company and develop small molecule inhibitors.
Does anybody have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say that I think the other really valuable thing you get from engaging with either companies or VCs is intellectual input. And, a lot of my research program has been sharpened or shaped by discussions with people, who see things from a clinical need perspective, which is really the, ultimate expertise of either a good VC or a good industry leader. And you also can be brought together with other scientists around the country who you might not interact with as deeply as part of a team that works together as either consultants or co-founders in one of these companies. And those academic interactions can be very synergistic also.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, there's a very large difference between what peer reviewers like and what ultimately is needed to take a drug into the clinic. And so those are I'd say almost diametrically opposed interests. And so when you engage with outside funders, people who are either financially or motivated by the hope of getting drugs into the clinic, they're really there to help you develop the therapy rather than develop the concept around it. And so it's really orthogonal piece of knowledge compared to what we normally learn in academics.
I'll echo Mark that some of the foundation missions are very specific for a particular purpose, and that fits our goal perfectly compared to some of the, for example, federal funding. For example, the project that really get Mark's and our work on developing that therapeutics that we are currently trying to push forward started with a small seed funding from the New Jersey Health Foundation with a small amount, $50,000, but it's very focused. It's focusing on try to validate this is a viable target and try to screen and find a compound that could block it. And that led to finding a compound, and then the next phase of investment from the foundation to move it to a startup company. And then now we are going to the Series A. So they are moving with us along the way, and they are very engaged in the process. That's a very different experience from more traditional funding sources.
Mona, do you want to add a little bit what motivated you to work with BMS?
Sure. So I think it was a case where really we had been developing technology that really fit in well with what Bristol Myers Squibb was at that time Celgene was able to target. And so for us, like working purely computationally, we thought about things from like a theoretical framework and trying to identify, functionally characterize this set of DNA binding proteins. And working with BMS, it gave us an opportunity to really think about it more from the translational point of view, and try to see if some of the methods we've developed that are really quite general could be used in this very important application of trying to find drug targets that they could also drug with their technology. So it's been really exciting to think about that prospect, and it's also changed the way that we kind of look at the problem and start thinking about how you might test or what cell line use to kind of test the things that we use.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to start by focusing our discussion first a little bit on foundational funding, because I think this is quite unique and different than what industry and VC funding interactions are like. So I guess for, say, the young faculty members that are listening in on today's panel, how do you recommend identifying and engaging with a foundation? How do you find a foundation to partner with you?
Well, maybe I will start. I would say that part of that is you try to reach out to them. Try to find the foundations that match your niche. For me, for example, my lab focus on breast cancer, and so it's obvious for us to reach out to foundations like Komen, American Cancer Society, Breast Cancer Research Foundation, and more specifically, metastatic breast cancer organizations like Metaviva. And they are more than happy to sponsor research focusing on metastatic breast cancer, metastatic disease. And sometimes it's like, you make your work known through platforms like this, and then the foundations would reach out to you. That's a different way of, making yourself available and open out there, and then they'll find a match and reach out to you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Eileen, so since you're heavily involved with the Ludwig Foundation, can you speak a little bit to how you first engaged with the foundation?
Well, I know a lot of the investigators that are in the larger Ludwig Cancer Research Institute, and I think that it was a situation where they reached out to us because it's pretty much what Yibin was saying, is that it was recognized that our work was important, and so they approached us about an opportunity for support. But also, so that's one way. But another way to engage with foundations is that they often have requests for applications, and so especially for young investigators, where you might not have a huge presence, and you might be unknown relatively. Apply, submit applications to foundations, where the topic of your proposed research is relevant. And that's a good way to begin a relationship with foundations.
Yeah, I will say as advice to young investigators is take advantage of the opportunities, exactly like Yibin and Eileen outlined, but most importantly, focus your energy on doing the most transformative science. And if in those years you do transformative science that really is different than what other people are doing, the money will follow and the foundations will find the relevance of your work, and engage with colleagues throughout the country, both junior and seniors, so that people know about your work.
Network.
Yeah.
Mona, do you have anything to add to this?
Not so much, really. I haven't engaged that much with foundations beyond through my.
So continuing with our discussion here with foundations, what type of projects tend to be best suited for foundational funding? Why would you approach a foundation as opposed to a traditional governmental grant? Let's see, Yibin, if you'd like to start us off.
Yeah, well, again, I think I always try to, when junior faculty or even my own postdoc ask me advice about how to write a period grant. I always said that read the RFA carefully. Because the foundations will state clearly what their missions, goals are, and what type of research that they would like. And so, for example, if I would just give MetaViber as an example. This is a foundation funded by patients who have stage 4 disease. Basically, they already have metastatic cancer, and they're less interested in preventing metastatic disease because they already have that. And so, proposals that focusing on treating patients who already have stage 4 disease should be the focus. And so, if you submit a grant proposal about preventing metastasis, it's not going to do well, And likewise, New Jersey Health Foundation is trying to help the faculty in academic institutions to translate basic science research into potentially groundbreaking medicine. And so, they are more willing to take risk in terms of you just have a great target and you don't have a compound yet, but they are willing to take the risk, support you to do initial screens. And if you try to submit a grant to a more mature, federal grant agency, you're not going to do well because you don't have anything to show yet. You don't have a lead and you don't have an assay and all that. And so some of the foundations are more willing to allow you to take risks. So I would say read the RFA carefully, read what their mission goals are, and also call the program director, of the research program and talk to them and actually pitch your idea, your specific aims, and tell them that this is what you want. What's their feedback about your proposal, and you actually get great feedbacks about how to improve it, how to have a different focus, and how to have a regional plan that will attract their interest.
Eileen or Josh, do you have anything to add?
Well, I could just add, build on what Yibin said. Often foundations are looking for shorter term projects that are, more preliminary, and, they would be like a stepping stone to an NIH grant. And I think that they like supporting that work because it can be higher risk, more innovative and exploratory. So I think that's important to consider. If you have a project in mind, it's a novel idea that, in the short term, you can find out if it's truly going to pan out to be transformative. That's often very attractive to foundations.
Thanks. Good. So when working with a foundation, then how is it different than working with, say, NSF or NIH? Are there any constraints? Are there any other expectations that a young investigator might not initially be aware of? So I don't know if, Josh, or Mona wanted to comment on this? I guess Josh.
I think it's very specific. So I think, just going with an open mind, and I think the university, institutional support is great on those issues. They can really help guide that side and let the faculty members focus on the science.
Mm. Does anybody have anything to add?
There are always, each foundation have agreements that you have to sign. So including the intellectual property agreements, and so there are certain constraints. Usually, foundations, their mission goal eventually is to benefit the patients, for example, and so they don't want to prevent you from advancing that goal, but they want to make sure that the intellectual property is protected and well managed, maximize its potential. And so that's one thing. Usually, the university have a grant office will review that carefully, and sometimes they can work with the foundation to modify the language that's needed. It's not like set in stone. Sometimes it's flexible, it's negotiable. And also, one thing I realized is that working with foundation I think it's a more intimate relationship. You actually get to know a lot of people at a foundation at a personal level. And it's almost like building a relationship, a family relationship. It's a long-lasting relationship because there's a mutual interest to see success in each other. And so I think it's a very fruitful experience to have, because it basically allows you to expand your horizon, not only your own area of work. Eventually, you will develop broader, bigger network and open up opportunities that you are not aware of before.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So now we're going to shift the conversation for the remaining time that we have to really focus on industry and VC funding, because I do think that this is where most of you have a lot of expertise, and I think it's very exciting. As someone, formerly from industry, I really do see the advantage of collaborating or collaborations between academia and industry. So I guess my first general question is, how did you first realize that you were ready to engage with a company? So say, let's start with just industrial. And how did you identify the company that you thought would be the best match? And so I guess to kick us off, we can start with Mona.
Sure. So in terms of identifying a company, I'd like to just say that Princeton has this great corporate relations office, and they have had us talk to people like over the last, more than a decade that I've been here. I've talked to various different companies about my work, and they've told me about their work. And a lot of times, there's not a great match, but every once in a while, there's been kind of a perfect match. And so I felt that, in my case, my collaboration is Celgene and Rutgers kind of fell into the last category, where we were working on zinc proteins, which was exactly the type of they were trying to target. So I felt it was a really obvious match once that introduction had been made. And it's been a really fruitful collaboration.
Great. Does anybody have anything to add to that about their experience?
So maybe I'll add about the university have create different opportunities to engage the company. And for my own experience, process like speed dating, in which you bring the people from the industry and from the university together in one day, quick meeting, short meeting, in my experience, didn't work out really well. It's just like too short of a interface. And what really works well is organic growth of interest, mutual interest of each other's research. For example, in my case, I reached out to Eli Lilly in one of the projects because I use a compound, a beta inhibitor, and the company have the compound, and they have interested to see the compound tested in the platform that we have in the lab. And a couple of projects that we work on, a very fruitful project in the lab, working on notch signaling in bone metastasis of breast cancer. was started not from my end, actually started from the company's end. So Mark approached me in one of the projects. They want to test one of the gamma secretase inhibitor in bone metastasis, and it worked out well. We actually end up publishing a paper, a very nice paper in Cancer Cell about that. And then that paper attracted the interest of another company, Amgen, that approached me to test the antibody they have against the JAG1 antibody. So, it's a great way that, again, once your research is known, oftentimes that attract the interest from the company side, and they approach you, and there's a strong desire to build collaboration because they have a vested interest, to test their compound or advance that in a different disease setting and so on. Yeah.
So there's also venues where venture capitalists will get together and, they'll have invite people to give talks on certain areas that are of interest. So it's sort of a, worldwide meet and greet. And so that's another mechanism that, once your findings get known, there are these meetings that you can present at where, you can connect with investors that are interested in your research. Another way is for, if you have something you think is worthy of commercialization, to reach out to, VCs and, and find out if they're interested.
Yeah, in terms of large companies in particular, like my two biggest engagements actually both started by having faculty collaborations and then having faculty members go to become leadership positions in companies. And there is more and more back and forth flow like this. And then often, people will hire students from your lab and that facilitates the collaboration. And so it really is nice if you can just create a functional network, and then you can benefit not just from funding, but also from the intellectual input, as Yibin pointed out.
Yeah. So actually that brings me to quite an interesting question, which is how have your interactions with companies and with your own startups really influenced the direction of your research? So I know, Mona, you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, so, as a computer scientist, I come from a very different angle than someone who works at trying to do drug development. And so I feel like that interaction I would say we've kind of in the past focused on a lot of testing. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. I don't know if anybody else is. Okay. So I think, we initially had approached these problems kind of from very purist and computer science point of view. How do you formulate the problem? How do you come up with solutions? How do you test it all in a computational setting? And I think that by interacting with companies who have very clear goals to identify genes of interest that they can target, it's really focused our work in many ways and kind of helped us hone our research program to kind of get to that type of question more quickly. So it's been very valuable. It's also been really interesting for me to hear about how they would think about doing the first set of testing once we introduce, give them a target. And that's also helped us develop some methods.
Does anybody else have anything to add? I know someone was ready to jump in and I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So I think the way biotech operates is very different from academia for obvious reasons. But interacting with the biotech industry, either by consulting or having a startup company, is intellectually fascinating because the focus is on understanding a target and developing a small molecule, for example. So the work is much more focused, but it's still very interesting because you can learn a lot about biology in a completely different way than you would if you were just, performing research in your lab, because you need to have a thorough understanding of the target. And I think I've learned so much from interactions with biotech, and it frames my thinking about what is a good target and what is not a good target.
Maybe
Yeah.
I'll ask Mark. Josh, sorry to cut you off. You want to proceed?
No, go for it.
Okay, so Mark worked with the company actually on his PhD thesis project. Maybe Mark, you could comment on how the interaction shaped your thesis, research.
Yeah, so we were focusing on a bone metastatic target, and a company came in with a disease or a drug that they developed for sickle cell disease actually, and then found that there's sort of this convergent similar networking where they found out that we were working on a similar mechanism, and thought that it would be a fruitful collaboration between both us and the company in order for us to advance our basic research and for them to advance a therapeutic into patients. And so the work that we wound up doing actually enabled the IND application for that company, and they moved into a phase 1 trial in breast cancer patients soon after we tied off that foundational research. So it sort of provided us with these unique tools to answer basic biology, and it provided them with really key insights in order to advance to the clinic.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, I completely agree with what everyone said about how you can really focus deeply in understanding a target or figuring out what type of targets to work on with a company. But there also now in the VC world are VCs who think very big, and Third Rock and Arch and Flagship are examples of this, who will tackle questions that have to be important for translation, but can be very big picture. And lately, for example, I've been thinking about diabetes more, and part diabetes as a cancer driver, part diabetes for its own sake. And one of the VC firms approached me and had a very different take on how to initially frame the problem. And obviously there are parts of that are proprietary to them, but there are parts of that are not proprietary to them that have really shaped us building new quantitative models, for example, of diabetes, that I wouldn't have thought of if I hadn't had those conversations. And so I may or may not ever get engaged deeply in a company with them, but I got huge intellectual input from seeing the way they were framing a problem.
Thank you. That's very illuminating. And it's good to see that, there's lots of alignment and ability to do great work in collaboration with a company. So we have a few minutes still of the panel, but I want to encourage our audience members to start putting questions in the chat, in the question and answer module, because we'll be starting the question and answer portion of this discussion in a few minutes. But before we do, I wanted to actually ask a quick specific question, which is kind of when in a project. So if you were thinking about the possibility of starting a company, when in the process of the project do you actually start reaching out to potential partners or for VC funding? What level of development do you need in your project before you can confidently reach out to say a VC?
That's something that I have a lot of experience in at this point. It's a dating and numbers game, and we've engaged having a candidate that's actually near to a clinical filing. We've engaged with more than 50 or 60 different VCs over the last 6 months, and learned that there's really two types of VCs. There are ones that invest in grand ideas, as Josh mentioned, and will invest in a name. They'll invest in Princeton and then an idea, and then they'll put a huge group of a lot of intelligence together around that, with a thought that smart people will solve big problems with great solutions. And then alternately, there's the other side where they want to see something that they can put in their money into it, and then it will advance all the way to the clinic with no problems whatsoever. So that requires a huge amount of work on the academic side. where you do need to bring in outside expertise in order to refine that package. So, everybody will need a medicinal chemist, a toxicologist, and a CMC specialist to come in and at least do some preliminary work over your drug candidates in order to put together this package that, they think would be attractive to industry, to the FDA, and that will require at most 14 to 18 months of development in order to get it into an IND filing and into the clinic.
18 months, that's a fast turnaround time. Very good. All right. Before we jump in to our Q&A session, I just wanted to see if you guys had any final comments or thoughts that you thought would be important for our audience to know, either about your interactions with foundations, starting companies, interacting with industry broadly.
I think it's a learning experience for all of us because we are not trained when we were, junior faculty or early in our career how to do that. So I want to commend it on Princeton's, effort to actually broaden this horizon in the last 5-10 years. And what's happening today is one of the reflection of, the university is really putting a full core effort to not only bring in the outside interest to invest in Princeton's research, but also train our student faculty and get us educated, and also help us along the way to provide coaching support to find industry partners, VCs, and we are professors, but we are also students in this area. We are constantly learning and becoming better. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I could add is that it used to be you ran your research program mostly on NIH funding, and the amount of funding from the NIH has not gone up in terms of what you get in a research grant. And I think that we have to broaden our approach now and seek out alternative sources of research funding.
Yeah, I'll just say, it's a constant effort to plant seeds, and then if they sprout at all, it's constant tending to water them. And it's very different than NIH funding this way, right? Where a great written document is, the essence of it. Here, it's, taking advantage of every interaction opportunity you have to discuss ideas, and hopefully some of them sprout.
Good. Okay, well, thank you so much. I think now with the last few minutes, we're going to move to our Q&A session, or Q&A portion of the session, I should say. So we have some really great questions from the audience. So the first one is in your experience, have you found that pharma is willing to work on orphan indications, so those with small patient populations? And sort of what is the level of interest that you get when you're going after orphan diseases? So I guess for us, in terms of cancer, I guess it's very small, specific, rare cancers is perhaps what they are asking about.
Yeah, I can comment on this a little bit. I think generally there's a great willingness, maybe not initially starting in a large pharma, but in a mid-sized pharma, to take on small indications. As long as you have a clinical benefit, often there's more room because big pharma isn't working there. Often the FDA barrier is lower. I think for those indications, it's very important that you have a cost-effective way to clinical proof of concept. And so they have to see some balance between the risk to get the clinical proof of concept and the back end gain. So for cancer, if you have single agent efficacy in a small cancer niche with an unmet need, this is like an ideal situation actually for starting a company. And, I think preferably that's 500 patients a year. 50 is a more challenging argument, but, most cancers are at that level.
Does anybody have anything else to add in their experience?
Yeah. There's tremendous interest, especially for the VCs, because there's a huge regulatory incentive as well for going after the orphan indications that often makes the economics much more attractive for them. So if you have your first approval in an orphan disease for a novel agent, then you wind up with this type of voucher at the end of your process that becomes tremendously valuable for downstream further development or selling it to another company. So, like Josh said, once you're at a level where you can recruit enough patients into your phase 1 or phase 2 trial, so that's anywhere in the probably 200 to 1,000 range, that actually becomes quite attractive. If you're at a cancer where it's less than 1 in a million per year, though, you'll just likely never be able to enroll your patients once you actually get to the clinic.
Yeah, that's a good point. You do need enough people for your at least your phase 1 and phase 2, right? Yeah, good. So I guess sort of continuing on that line of thought, then, what is the typical life cycle for new product development for cancer? Let's see. Yeah, so I guess you mentioned 18 months, which seems quite fast earlier. But yeah, do you guys have a sense for what the typical life cycle is from inception to product?
Yep. Yeah, I can speak to that as well. So it's 18 months, I'd say, once you have a development candidate. So the typical, I think at the academic realm, what they're looking for is screening with 4 to 5 different chemical families. And then you have normally about 2 years of medicinal chemistry optimization off that, where you're generating around 500 different structures. After you've nominated a candidate that you want to move into the clinic, you'll have another 14 to 18 months of IND enabling work. And then from there, you're looking at anywhere from a 5 to 8 year clinical trial pathway, depending on the size of the patients. And if you can do a registrational trial in the 2B setting rather than a phase 3. So most of your wiggle room is going to be on the clinical development on the back end, depending on your clinical benefit and the number of patients it is. But if everything goes well, you can get into the clinic maybe 4 to 5 years after initiating the project.
Yeah, I would say 4 to 5 years after a fully funded project, typically, where you're going after a target. Often on the academic side, in my experience, it's a lot longer than that. Figuring out how you validate the target enough to get initial interest in developing chemical matter. And then, normally when we start on something, we can't immediately put a dozen chemists on it the way a pharma or a well-funded VC company would. We may put one chemist on it and it goes slower. But if you get to a tool compound and you can find interesting in vivo biology, then you're in a good position to have discussions about the next step.
Good. Does anybody else have anything to add? All right. So I guess we have one last question from the audience, and it's about return on investment and sort of what the expectations are when you engage with a VC. So I guess that's broad and not just necessarily cancer related, but let's try to focus it on cancer startups. I don't know if Mark or Yibin can comment on that, given how many startups you guys have worked with or are currently in.
Yeah, Mark maybe can comment on it. He interacts with quite a whole bunch of them.
Yeah. I think a very common refrain is they're looking for a 10x. So the drop-off rate when we started this project in 2017 was probably about 98 to 99%. By the time VCs come in, the drop-off rate is still in that 80 to 90% range. So they're looking to only have maybe 70 to 80% drop-off, and then to have 3 out of 10 companies have a 10 to 100x return on their investment. So that's the math that they're normally dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And I would just say against that math, really, I think what they're looking for is something that meets clinical need, where there's a clear road to clinical proof of concept. And I have to say, just thinking as an academic about the full road to clinical proof of concept is really important, or just a giant idea that can change the world.
That transformative therapy, yes. Great. Well, we're at time, so I'd like to thank you all so much for your time and your input. Your insight into different routes for interacting with foundations and industry and VCs has been really enlightening. So thank you again. And I encourage all of our audience members to enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Bye.